Um, is Steve Vernel, and there he is in the small little screen at this point in time. So Steve, thank you for taking all our nonsense in terms of organizing and waiting and not waiting and using links and not using links and whatever it is. Luckily, we're all in IT, so we all know that kind of situation. So without further ado, I'm going to leave you in the capable hands of Steve Vernel for the next 20 minutes or so. And yeah, over to Steve.
Okay, thanks very much, Reinhard. Don't know how capable my hands are, but we'll see about that. Hopefully you can see the slides on the screen. Maybe you can see me. The slides are better anyway. So let's see if this works. I'll try and move my window out the way so I can see if anything comes up in the chat or anything like that. Let's leave that over there. So, title of the presentation then, you can see we're posing the question, are we lacking balance? And this is all about the content and coverage of cybersecurity degrees, which I think are, I guess, internationally recognized now as something that has become more prominent in recent years. And this is based on a bit of joint work done by myself from the University of Nottingham and my co-author Eliana Stavru from the Open University of Cyprus. Said my hand weren't that capable, my mouth is even less so. Right, let's see if we can advance the slides. So, again, internationally, I think there's one thing that comes through from a lot of the survey data and the industry reports in recent years is that we need more cybersecurity professionals, we need more people working in the field, and we need them to enter with an appropriate skill set and background. But that raises the question, perhaps, that do those studying cybersecurity in its different guises, what do they understand cybersecurity to actually be? What do they understand it to be about? And if we were to take a selection of people who believe they've studied cybersecurity at university level, would they have a comparable and compatible view of the world? And will they have used a comparable reference point to form that understanding? So that's a little bit about what this study is looking at. So we're looking at it from the perspective of academic degrees, particularly in this context, because it's easier to assess the MSc level, the master's level, where we're talking about a shorter duration program. You do, of course, get cybersecurity dedicated degrees at undergraduate, bachelor's, and other bachelor type levels as well. But what are they going to get if they study at this level, and then if you're looking at a graduate who's emerged from a cybersecurity degree, what have they actually been equipped to do and to understand? Now, if you look at certain master's degrees in this context, then the degree titles themselves, they suggest a particular focus in some cases. I've given some examples of, well, real and hypothetical degrees. You might be able to find one that's actually called this. So things like MSc Computer Networks and Security, that will tell you that the focus of the program is going to be around networking and probably the security aspect framed there. MSc Cybersecurity and Digital Forensics, that has a particular skew towards the forensic side, etc., etc. But there are numerous degrees, and again, this does apply at BSc or at the bachelor's level as well, but just plain old cybersecurity, so MSc Cybersecurity in this case. If somebody studied something with that title, then I would suggest it's reasonable that you would expect that such a degree would present a holistic view of cybersecurity. It's not going to be skewed towards a particular slant on the topic like those other titles I've given above. So what we looked at in this study is the extent to which this actually happens in practice, and looking at a sample of MSCs all called the same thing, and then looking at, well, what actually do they deliver? So we've tried to assess the coverage, the consistency of the master's experience if you're studying something just called MSc Cybersecurity. And this is a reasonable focus to give, in the sense that you've got many students who might have done, let's say, a more general computing, IT, wider disciplines degree at an undergraduate level, and then decide they want to specialize in cybersecurity when they go to their master's education. And so what we've looked at in trying to assess the provision here is the extent to which the degrees cover the technical perspective on cybersecurity versus the non-technical perspective, and even the use of the word versus there suggests that they're in some way in competition with each other. They shouldn't be. What we're looking for, ideally, is that a master's degree in cyber would cover both technical and non-technical perspectives. And we've also looked at the more specific, well, I've said here the specific content of the technical topics. I've also looked here at the non-technicals. We'll see as we go through the slides. And then that leads us to think about the consistency of, well, what's the student experience going to be when they're studying the topic, and more particularly when they graduate? What will they then be positioned to do as early career cyber practitioners? Okay, so to do this, we clearly need some degrees to look at, and then we need to look at them and see what's in them. So this is actually, it's part of some wider work that Eliana and I are doing, looking at provision across a range of countries. So we've looked at other European countries as well. But this particular paper, and therefore the presentation, it's focused just on a subsample we've taken from the UK. So we looked at, in the UK context, a cross-section of different universities, so a range of geographies across our very extensive country, and then a mix of university types, so what we'll call the traditional universities. So in UK parlance, that's those that existed as universities before the year 1992, typically the more research-intensive, research-led universities, and what are still called new universities or post-92 universities, which traditionally are more teaching focused. So we've included samples of both from a range of locations across the country, but in all cases, the degree titles we've sampled are just called MSc Cybersecurity. And this is quite a common thing to find now. Certainly in the UK, our National Cybersecurity Centre has a certification program for academic degrees in cybersecurity, and the biggest focus of that is these generalist cybersecurity degrees. Now, because there's actually quite a large sample of universities we could find, we also had some other inclusion criteria. So firstly, as I've already mentioned a couple of times, we only wanted to look at degrees that were specifically titled MSc Cybersecurity, and nothing that was more specialized in the title. So we are theoretically comparing like with like. The degree structure should be 180 credits overall, which is the typical number of UK credits for a one-year full-time master's degree, and that 120 of those credits should be for taught modules and 60 credits towards a dissertation. We were only interested in assessing the taught credits because obviously that's the bit that's consistent for all the students on the programme. The dissertation, they can take it off in whatever direction they like, and so there they could specialize in aspects of cybersecurity that verge away from what they were explicitly taught. So we just wanted to compare the bit that should be consistent for any student on that program. In the same vein, we were therefore interested in programs that didn't have lots of optional modules and sub-pathways through them, so that we were comparing programs where it was a defined, specific, this is what cybersecurity looks like for all the students on the program in terms of the taught provision. And then the final thing we needed was that there was sufficient information for us to actually assess what the program content was, in terms of, on the public-facing website, for example, that there was a clear list not only of the module titles, but also some indication credibly of the module content and syllabi. So we could assess what did it look like a little bit more under the surface. So our resulting sample group was, surprisingly enough, programs entitled MSc Cybersecurity, 10 of them, and a market from which a sufficient number of MSCs could be sampled, while also maintaining the anonymity of the institutions involved. So we know the names of the universities we sampled, but we're not sharing that within the paper or the presentation because it's not important who it was. The thing is that they've all got programs labeled the same, but as you'll see, the composition content is rather different. All of these assessments were done based on the module information that was available about 10 months ago now. So during late, it's about 12 months ago now. I can't even look at a calendar. During late 2023. But the key thing there is this is now reflecting the degrees currently running in this academic year in the UK. Okay, so before getting to tables and things that show you a direct comparison between the programs, the overall observations are there's a broad similarity to some degree, in the sense that if we had to characterize the programs generally, we'd say that they were devoting the largest proportion of their talk credits towards topics we would consider to be in the technical aspect of cybersecurity, but even there, quite a variation in what's actually covered as you look further down. And so therefore we needed to look at a more granular level. Now, in order to do that, we needed some sort of topic map against which to map things and to work from. Now, of course, we could have used something that was already there. So there's the way that, for example, in the UK, we have CyBOK, the Cybersecurity Body of Knowledge. If you've not seen that, go to www.cybok.org. And that's got an extensive set of information as a body of knowledge about what cybersecurity looks like and contains. But at the same time, it's perhaps a bit skewed towards technical topics in the knowledge areas that it highlights, and there's maybe less granularity and separation in the non-technical ones. There's also CSEC from IEEE, ACM, IFIP, and AIS, the cybersecurity curricular guidance, more geared towards undergraduate programs, but again, it breaks the topic down. But what we did for the purposes of this exercise was we actually looked, okay, we were led by the programs themselves that we were seeing. What were they presenting as their focus areas in module titles or key areas of content, wrapping that all together and then basically using it as a reference point against which to compare the programs themselves. So having identified all the key topics that they pulled out as modules, then using that as the reference point to compare across the full set. So what did that give us? So in terms of technical topics, the sort of headings we pulled out, we think, do they cover something that we would categorize as architecture and design related, crypto, forensics, hardware security, malware analysis? So I'm not going to read all of the words on the slides explaining the categories. They're included in the paper. But the technical list continues with network security, security ops, testing, software security, and system security. So these were collectively all represented somewhere in module titles or key module themes within the programs that we saw. So that's the technical side. And then on the non-technical topics, we pulled out things such as audit and certification, business continuity, coverage of human factors, legal and regulatory aspects of cybersecurity. Moving to the next slide, policy and standards, risk assessment and risk management, security management, and security education, training and awareness, so SETA, CETA, however you pronounce that. So encompassing those aspects and also broadly into security culture issues. So hopefully, having seen the list of topics, and I'll just go back so you can just re-see them again. So there's those, and them. Hopefully, having seen the topics, hopefully you're not sitting there thinking, oh, there's something massive that's been missed. So certain things, for example, like penetration testing, you might not have seen it mentioned as a specific label, but it fits into security testing or potentially into network security, depending on how it's been buried within a syllabus. So we've got a reference point to then start looking at the syllabi themselves across each of these 10 programs. And I've labeled the programs here A to J, and what we've got on this slide is just a technical subset of topics. I've got the non-technical ones on the next slide, then an overall thing in a smaller font that's less easy to read. But hopefully you can see from this, the key message, I guess, is that all of the cells aren't filled with ticks. So there are some programs, just using the top line as an example, that we would consider covered architecture and design aspects of cybersecurity. So programs C, D, E, and H in that case. So 4 out of the 10. Something like network security covered almost by all of the programs. Program E didn't have something specifically linked to that, not in a significant way anyway. And similarly, security testing was represented in all the programs except program B. But we can see generally quite a lot of ticks in the columns for most of the cases. Program B is probably the one there that has the least, well, not probably, it is the one that has the fewest ticks there. If we move on to the non-technical topics, we can see, okay, there are some programs that have lots. Program B, again, just has a couple, as do some of the others. Program J, notably, has no ticks in the non-technical topics set. And I notice now on the side there, my fonts are varied in that topic column, which is very bad practice. So just looking now at the full set, so putting those two tables together, we can now see the full picture of all the topic areas across all of the programs. And it really is quite a mixed picture here. Now, remembering that all of these programs have exactly the same title. They're all called MSc Cybersecurity. But if we look, I don't know, at Program H, for example, or Program I, we can see quite a lot of the topics being covered. And there's some sort of balance, or actually between the coverage of technical themes and non-technical themes. They're not covering all the same ones, but there's a good sample from each category. Program J, just to point at it again, notably has relatively few ticks overall, and they're all just in the technical aspect of cybersecurity. Now, what these ticks aren't telling you is the weight of coverage that the different topics were receiving. So did they get a 10 credit module, a 20 credit module, or a significant slice within, let's say, a 10 credit module or something like this? So they're not all ticks of equal sizes in reality. They are equal sizes on the table there, but it's giving you a mix. Okay, that's the key thing. So the talk credits in the programs, so that tells us what the cybersecurity topic coverage looks like. The talk credits weren't all necessarily focused on cybersecurity themes. There are some modules within the programs that were on non-cyber topics altogether. So there might have been, for example, a module on software engineering, networking more generally, computer architecture, not in the context of cybersecurity, just generally talking about architecture of systems. And for whatever reason, that being considered something relevant to put into a program that still is called MSc Cybersecurity overall. In the UK context, in MSCs, it's very common to have 10 or 20 credits even dedicated towards some sort of module that represents research skills, which then in turn helps the students when they're doing their dissertation or project work. And as I say, some they do nonetheless elect to cover wider computing topics. And that's, arguably it gives you that understanding, as it says there, of where cybersecurity is needed in other parts of the patch and where it fits in. And indeed, some of those modules, although titled more generally, might have cybersecurity elements within them, but they're not wholly and solely cybersecurity modules if they are. Okay, so that basically adds further to the variation. So those ticks across the different columns in the programs there weren't all necessarily adding up to 120 credits. So if we just go back just one more time to the thing, just keeping your mind on the variation that exists within the different programs. So there's no single topic that's covered by all programs, and there's no program that covers all topics, is one of the key messages to take away from that. There's quite a lot of variation. So then if we are going back to that point at the start in the title of the paper, so lacking balance, I mean, if we look at this now, this is showing the proportion of technical and non-technical cybersecurity topics in the focus of the modules. Some modules where we considered, okay, the content of that module is genuinely a mix between technical and non-technical content, but still focused on cybersecurity, and some modules where the content is, at least as far as we could tell, not specifically cybersecurity related. And again, I mean, that it shows a further element of the variation. So you can now see the proportions of non-cyber content across different degrees. So program E, for example, is entirely cybersecurity related content, as is program F. Program F probably the most equally balanced in terms of a good slice of technical and non-technical and a bit of mixed. So that's the one where if you wanted everything to be spread fairly equitably, that's where it's occurring. Program J, again, I suppose, calls itself out because not only was it the one that had the fewest ticks, so distinct topic areas in cybersecurity being covered, half of the program is not about cybersecurity specifically anyway, even though, just to reiterate the point again, all of these programs have exactly the same title. Okay, so none of the programs included all the topics, none of the topics represented in all the programs, as I've said. Some topics seem more likely than others to be represented. certain topics, such as hardware security, software security, are underrepresented compared to other topics. So network security and security testing, you're very likely, whatever program you do, to encounter something around that. Securing the software, hardware security, awareness and training, less likely. And as I keep pointing out now, Program J covers include no coverage of the non-technical aspects, but so with exactly the same title as all the other programs, it completely overlooks this perspective on cybersecurity, which I find rather bothersome, I suppose. So which of them is the right answer? Well, potentially all of them, if that's what you want cybersecurity to be, and that's what you want to know about, or none of them, if you're genuinely looking for a graduate or to be the graduate with a properly holistic perspective. So they are significantly different, even within just the technical subset. If we look at where they're focusing more of their attention, it's still quite a different picture they paint there. So can this be avoided? Is it to be expected that this is the case? Because certainly, as I say on the slide here, the host universities in various cases are likely to be wanting to skew their delivery to where they feel they are strong in cybersecurity. So, particularly at master's level, these programs might be underpinned by a research active staff base, and so those staff are wanting to bring the things that they're doing in the research context perhaps into their module delivery. And certainly if you were to say every university has to deliver exactly the same thing, then that probably wouldn't be welcome either, and arguably it would limit the learning opportunities. But the thing here is perhaps that because they've all been labelled the same way and you can't differentiate them from the label on the tin, so to speak, there needs to be some way for both the students who are electing to study the programs and arguably the employers who are looking to recruit from them to have some means of understanding, well, what are they actually getting? They shouldn't have to be drilling into the syllabus to even the same extent that we've done within the paper to establish that there's such a significant difference in what they might get. And so perhaps there should be, let's say, a baseline expectation that there is a common core of both technical and non-technical cybersecurity coverage that, at least if you're calling your program MSc Cybersecurity and you're not saying it's a security and forensics or network security program, you would be expected to have a credible coverage of that foundation. So the implications then, I guess, are fairly clear from what I've been saying, that there's an abundance of degrees. We've only looked at 10 of them that had those particular characteristics we were interested in. But even in the wider context, this variability is going to continue. So students need to understand more about what they're going to get, and employers need to understand that they need to look beyond the headline title of the degree. And I say here, there is arguably, from the perspective of the university offering a program with this title, there is arguably this sort of duty of care that you ought to be making sure that you are providing something that is broad, drawing from across both the technical and non-technical perspectives, so you don't mislead people to think cybersecurity is all about technology and boxes and things that you can plug in and it does the cybersecurity for you, to trivialize it somewhat. And also that it's balanced, so it's not significantly skewed towards topics from one perspective more than the other. Okay, if you're going to do something that is more skewed and less broad, reflect that in the title of the degree. Okay, so drawing to a conclusion, we're not saying there needs to be a fixed template. There needs to be some ability for flexing and focus and specialization within areas that some other programs might choose not to cover. But there needs to be this basis for cybersecurity to be understood and interpreted and delivered as a broad discipline if it's being presented as such. And I say employers could also benefit from a clearer view, particularly if they're just looking at a pool of applicants, all who on the surface appear to be holding the same degree title. And that's it. Contact details there for myself and Eliana, should you wish to follow up with us with any inquiries later. But if there's time and space and opportunity, I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, so let's give him a hand and hope he can hear it. Yeah, so any questions to Steve? There's one from Jan. I'm just taking the mic there because for obvious reasons.
Thank you. Hi, Steve. Thanks for a great presentation. Just to,
Thank you very much.
can you briefly elaborate on the admission requirements and the similarity between different degrees, whatever the admission requirements are? And then secondly, how does the programs align to international professional certification like CSSIP? Thanks.
Okay, so in terms of the entry requirements, typically you'd be looking for somebody to have got, to enter into a master's, typically a 2-1 or a first-class degree at undergraduate level, but maybe also an upper second-class degree. So we're looking at, let's say, people who've got at least a 50% average in their undergraduate degree, but more typically 60% and upwards to get in at master's level. And for these degrees in cybersecurity, most of them would be looking for people to be coming with some sort of pre-existing technical background. So they not necessarily to have done a computer science degree beforehand, but some technology-oriented perspective, so that they can be expected to be broadly and well, more significantly IT literate. So they've got that grounding to understand the perspectives that the programs are likely to be coming from. But it's not exclusively the case. So some of the degrees will also be happily entertaining applicants from a more interdisciplinary background. I think it's just that the extent, again, looking at the way that some of them differ in terms of their extent of coverage of non-technical and technical. Those that are more specifically technical are likely to be looking for more technical entrants at the start. In terms of alignment to international, I suppose, the professional certifications, it varies. Again, some programs you find that they will explicitly be saying they've mapped to a particular reference. I mean, not necessarily CISSP, so ISC2's, I suppose, flagship professional certification there, but there will be some that will be using, well, for example, in the UK, very commonly, they'll be using the CyBOK knowledge areas as a point of reference to say, okay, we cover bits of this one, we don't cover bits of that knowledge area, etc. But again, it's not from the perspective of being required to cover particular topics, it's just being able to show where they have their center of gravity and where perhaps they don't.
Thank you. I think we kind of out of time. I'm standing between the audience and being a bad session manager and the cocktail function at 17:15. I would have invited you for a drink, Steve, but unfortunately you'll have to get your own since you didn't come. So thank you very much. Let's give Steve a last hand.
I'll think that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye all.